Mhm. Okay, so my name is Christina Fields. I'm a professor in civil and environmental engineering, and I am the leader of the Civil Engineering 4680 Cycling Infrastructure in the Netherlands course. And I've offered it 3 different times very successfully, and I partner with a university in the Netherlands called Windesheim, which is a partner university with UW Platteville. So that's one thing that's very unique about my program, is that we work directly with students and with faculty at that university. And so that means that my students get to have friends from the Netherlands, which is really great. And some of them are still communicating with each other. So that one of the things I really like about being a faculty member is watching my students develop and seeing them become passionate leaders in actually this industry of cycling as designers and planners, but also having friendships internationally is a real bonus. So, so it's my pleasure to kind of explain the course to you. The next offering I am hoping for would be in 2022. We usually go at the end of the spring semester, and so I haven't picked the exact dates yet because my child is graduating from high school in 2022, and they haven't put out the graduation dates yet, so we'll find a good time then. This course is a civil engineering, environmental engineering course. That doesn't mean that other students who aren't in the program could not go. You certainly can. It's just a discussion that I would have between myself and the students to understand their motivation behind it. And so that would be just a discussion. I have in the courses that I have offered in the past of this particular course, I have students from different universities participating. UW-Madison and Michigan Tech are both universities that I have collaborated with, having students join me, and they get credit from their institution to take the course. And I am happy to expand on it. So others, whatever other universities you have friends at or connections with, they are they're able to join us. So my contact information is here. If at any time you've got questions about the program, go ahead and ask. I like to start by explaining within our programs of civil and environmental engineering what this course counts as. So this is our program sheet for civil engineering. Within civil engineering, in the last year of education, all students are required to take 14 credits of technical elective in a specific area. And this course is approved to count as 3 of those 14 class credits. And so it falls, our students are familiar with this program sheet, so this is where it falls. It also counts as a 3-credit international education course. So it is a double counter in that you're getting 3 credits, but really you're getting 6 at the same time. So it counts as 3 credits international and 3 of technical elective in any discipline. Similarly, our program is also environmental engineering, and within environmental engineering, they have 9 credits of technical electives that are required before graduation, and this counts as 3 of those 9. And it also counts as an international education. And then a lot of our students also are part of the sustainability and renewable energy systems major or minor. And that is a whole major or minor on campus, so there's other students involved as well. And they have also said that this course would count as part of their technical electives, so 3 credits of technical elective and 3 credits of international education. So those are the 3 programs that I have directly connected with where students would get credit, specifically those 6 credits really within their program. There could be others on campus that we could work with. So if you are a student of a different major, that's something that we could talk about. And this is just the minor sheet. And so in the minor, it would count as 3 of the credits within civil and enviro. Okay, a little bit more about the program. Where do we go? Where is the Netherlands? It's such a small country that it's hard to see on a world map. So here's a zoomed in version of Europe, and it's tucked in here. It's around Belgium and Germany. The interesting thing about the size of the Netherlands is that it's 1/3 of the size of Wisconsin. And when you think of it that way, that really just blows my mind. I've been lucky enough to travel quite a bit throughout the Netherlands. And when I think about being able to travel, because there's a lot of, besides cycling in the Netherlands, there's a really good train network. And so I've been able to do quite a bit of traveling amongst the Netherlands. And I think, oh man, if only I could travel that easily around Wisconsin without my personal automobile. So that's pretty, it is, for transportation, which is actually my background. I am a transportation engineer. This is the place to go as far as public transport is concerned. The map on the right is a zoomed in map of the Netherlands. Most people have heard of Amsterdam. And the city that we do go to Amsterdam, the program, the blue areas are some of the communities that we work with. And then Zwolle in red here is the city that Windesheim University is at. I also spent 2015, the fall of 2015, on sabbatical in the Netherlands, in Zwolle at Windesheim, working with the faculty and students there developing this course. And so we stay the majority of the time here, but we also stay a few days in Amsterdam as well, because it's such a cultural experience, and the cycling there is vastly different than what you experience elsewhere in the country, but it's also really important, I think, to get kind of that exposure there too. So this is just a picture of Google Maps of Windesheim and of Zwolle. And so Zwolle is a star city, so that's the shape. It's like a moat around the city. And the university is down in this lower corner. We fly into Amsterdam from Chicago, and we arrive, then we go from Amsterdam to Zwolle on the train. So we arrive at the train station. And then the first time we get there, it's really close to the city center. The city center is inside this star shape, inside the moat. And so we typically, we walk there because it's really close, and we connect. This is where our hotel is located, and our bicycle rental is really close by. So we just walk to get a little bit of a exposure to the city and pick up our bikes. And from then we are cycling all over the place, including over to Windesheim. So you can see, as most European cities are, they're well connected. Netherlands is very flat, so it's really easy cycling. And because they're one of the best countries in the world for cycling and have some of the highest cycling rates, the reason I've chosen the Netherlands is because of the amazing cycling infrastructure that's there. So there's lots of great ways to get from our hotel to Windesheim and throughout the community on that great cycling network. And so that's the university that we work at. They have about 20,000 students there. This is one of the buildings. This is the inside. This is called the X building because it looks like little X's on the outside. It's a pretty amazing building on the inside. You can notice as you're going up the stairs, they're actually in half-story increments, both stairs and a ramp. So that's something I've not seen before in a building. So there's a lot of pieces, right? And you know this about an international course. It's not just about the curriculum you provide. It's about the experience that you have and all the stuff that you see and the people that you meet. It's just a whole bunch of eye-opening stuff. So these are just pictures of some of the past students. Usually or every time we have a party or a picnic with the Windesheim students. And that program is specifically called Mobility. It's one of the only, I don't even think there's a mobility program in the US as far as a university degree, but they're all about why do people choose the way they transport themselves, and what can we do to influence or change that? So it's a pretty unique way. I mean, a lot of us in the US, we just decide we're going to drive because that's what everybody does. That's how we grew up, and that's how it is. But it's not like that in the Netherlands. And one could argue maybe that's not the best way to do it. So when you have a country as small as the Netherlands, but it's one of the densely, if not the most densely populated country in Western Europe, if everyone drove there, they would run out of room to park all these vehicles. So it wouldn't necessarily work. So they do have a lot of public transport, like I said, trains, buses, rail, metro, of course, lots of cycling, walking. And so it's important that they try to convince those to see if they can convince those who are choosing a mode like just having a personal automobile, could they somehow convince them to switch to a different mode of transport? So it's a pretty unique degree, and it brings in a lot of different perspectives that we usually don't have here in the US. So I like to say, I could tell you all about what it's like to cycle in the Netherlands, but it's a lot more interesting, eye-opening when you get to experience it yourself by actually going there for study abroad. So that's why I developed this course, is because I see in our country there are opportunities to increase the amount of cycling, but we need help in figuring out what would it actually look like in the end. And we should turn to international countries that do this professionally who are really experts at it to learn their lessons. And so that's why I developed the course. This lower picture is really fun. Our students here on our campus, we have the largest student org on campus called the American Society of Civil Engineers, and it's also an international, of course, a professional organization, but also international. And one of the activities that they do, the students make a concrete canoe. Sounds kind of funny, a canoe made of concrete, but it's a real thing. And so these students were part of our concrete canoe team at UW-Platteville, and there's a concrete canoe team at Bindesheim. So it was really fun for them to meet those students and say, hey, we were actually working on the same kind of things. These are some of the faculty that we work with in the Netherlands. So we work with the first and second year mobility students. And so our students interact together in classes and they work on projects together. And these are the faculty. These are the faculty up here that we work with. These are two professionals that work at the city of Zwolle. Mark is actually a cycling ambassador for the Netherlands. Meredith and Matthew are actually both American citizens who live in the Netherlands. Meredith and Matthew are both PhD students working at two different universities. Meredith is in Amsterdam and Matthew's in Eindhoven. And they're both PhD students working in cycling infrastructure. And Meredith's actually working on cycling study tours in particular. So we've interacted with her. So a really important part of this course is interacting with these professionals and learning what does cycling, why do so many, the big question really is why do so many people cycle in the Netherlands? And it isn't just infrastructure, which is the name of the course, but students quickly learn it's a whole lot of things that really encourage people to cycle in the Netherlands. And so it's really important to me that my students are interacting with these experts. These are world-renowned experts in the area of cycling transport. And if you read an article, it's always fun for me. I'll be reading something online about cycling in the Netherlands, and inevitably one of these people will be in the article. And I'm thinking, I am so blessed that I have learned from, basically my Windesheim colleagues up here have connected me with the people I need to meet, and they keep expanding the network. So it's really exciting to be part of their program. If you look at cycling in the Netherlands, it is hard to gather data about the number of people and the percentage of people and how they transport themselves in any place. Platteville, the university, the US, any place. So that data, you can't really collect it. It's really difficult, but people try. And so the caveat with this slide is like, these are numbers and they're decent. I mean, I think the Netherlands does it probably, it's a little bit easier because of the size of the country and the way that they're organized to collect this data than maybe it is for the size of the US. But in general, the idea of this slide is about 27% of the trips in the Netherlands are made by bike versus 1 or less than 1% in the US. And there's lots of reasons behind that we get into the course. And so specifically in some of the cities that we go to, the mode split, which is what that means, the percent of trips made by which mode, the mode split for cycling in some of these cities is really high. And so we get to live in Zwolle and experience that, live in Amsterdam, experience that and see that and be a part of that and feel what that is like. When I went to Groningen with my son, he actually said, Mom, this seems almost like too many bikes. And if you've been in Amsterdam, we don't cycle until later on in our experience in Amsterdam, because during a typical day cycling in Amsterdam for a novice is pretty scary, actually. So we do it on a Sunday morning to make it still a great experience, but maybe with a reduced number of people cycling. Some of our largest cycling percentage cities in the US. We're lucky to have one of them here in Wisconsin, which is Madison. But commonly you'll hear Minneapolis has certainly been improving, Portland, Seattle, Boulder, Davis, California. So even New York City, Chicago, a lot of these cities are recognizing, especially with COVID now, that people are transporting them in different ways, and they need safe infrastructure, and they want safe infrastructure to do that. So we are seeing a lot of our cities turning the corner and spending money, and have been for the last 15, 20 years on cycling infrastructure. And so the motivation behind this course also is we are generating the next version of civil engineers And oftentimes those civil engineers get into transportation. And so we should be exposing them to different modes of transport, not just designing for the automobile. This is kind of a fun slide. One of the neat things about cycling in the Netherlands is seeing all the different types of bikes and ages of people that ride them. So this is not uncommon. So there's no training wheels, it seems like, in the Netherlands. The kids are born, their parents put them on a bike and they put them in the front, or they hang them off the back, or they carry them in their chest. And then they go right to their own scoot bikes, and then they ride until they die, basically. And so it's not uncommon to see people, elderly people, riding their bicycles. And the electric bicycle has really increased the ability for people to continue cycling. It's actually 50% of the market share now for bicycles in the Netherlands are electric bikes, and we're certainly seeing an increase of that even in Wisconsin. There's a couple of e-bikes. I don't know, Barbara, if you've noticed that there's a couple from Belmont that go back and forth between Belmont and Platteville, and they have e-bikes. So we're even starting to see more e-bikes around here. My neighbor has, they have 2 e-bikes, and they're awfully fun to ride. But I think we'll see just an increased amount of cycling occurring, and the e-bike makes it easier, especially when you're talking about the hills, right? This is a hilly city, and not everybody can do that, or they would cycle more often if they had a little boost with their electric bike. So it's kind of fun to see that those bikes are entering this system. There's also different design of bikes. So I've seen lots of different things transported by bikes and different types of bikes. So that's a really fun part of it. The big question, like I say, that we are always looking to answer within the course is, why do the Dutch bicycle? And so to get at that, because we're meeting so many different people, and we're visiting so many different cities, and the students are participating in the active cycling in these places, they end up, they're required to keep a journal. And so as part of that journal, then they pick this question apart, and the journal is laid out. I've laid out into different chapters, some of which they're required to comment, write, draw pictures on, and then they have additional chapters that they can add to on their own. And then the idea is to try to figure out the answer to this question. So that journal ends up being something that they get graded on in the end, and that's been really rewarding to me to read, and a good keepsake for the students themselves. The whole course is really based on these 5 principles of sustainable safety. So in transportation in the Netherlands, this is, how do they decide when they're deciding where to put infrastructure? And maybe I should define that term. So infrastructure, as we would know, would be roads, sidewalks, buildings, our water and wastewater systems, electricity grid, signalized intersections, any of the physical stuff that civil and environmental engineers actually design and SRS people put into place that we use for day-to-day life to improve our quality of life. So in the Netherlands, when they're figuring out for transportation, where should they put this infrastructure and why, they have, in the last 30 years, they've come up with this new term called, it's not new anymore, but they call it sustainable safety. So it's their way of approaching where they put this infrastructure and why. And so it's based on these 5 principles. And so when we first start in this course, even before we get to the Netherlands in the pre-course meetings, I introduce these topics to my students, and then they read a little bit about them, and then they definitely go experience it when we go there. So in one of the very first days, they'll have the students at Windesheim will actually teach my students about sustainable safety along with their faculty. And then some of them will take us out into the field and we'll cycle around Zwolle, and they will get experience in some examples of each of these principles. And that way they're building on their own knowledge. Sustainable safety is also called Vision Zero. If you're in the transportation realm, in the US or in the world, that is a commonly used word. The idea is in the US, we have about 45,000 fatalities every year due to transportation. And why should we be satisfied with 45,000? The goal should be 0. So the idea started in Sweden and then spread throughout different countries who are trying to take the approach of the goal is no deaths in transport. And so what the Netherlands, their approach to that is called sustainable safety, and that's how they're doing it. And because of the application of these principles, they have seen about a 20 to 30% reduction in fatalities, and every year they improve on these principles. So it's our students are really learning about a way to design a system that could work anywhere. Doesn't really matter where they are, but they're learning it from a group of experts who have been doing this for 30 years, right? Like the US has a Vision Zero version of this. It will look different, but it's developing. And so my students can be a part of the development of making our country a safer place to transport people. And they have, right? So I've graduated. Most of these students I've had now have graduated and are doing that. And a few of them are working specifically in cycling. So this is a typical intersection. This isn't Zwolle. This is one that we go through. This is infrastructure. You might recognize some of it. Some of it is you can see in Madison, but for the most part, it's pretty much different. So the cycling infrastructure in the Netherlands in many places is red so that it's easily identifiable. This is a bike box. So the idea is at a signalized intersection that the bikes would go in front of the cars, and then they have their own dedicated bike signal, a signal head here that has bikes on it. And that allows the cyclists to go ahead of the automobiles and clear the intersection prior to the cars going through it. So that's safer, right? So I'm separating modes in this case, and that makes a lot of sense. And so a lot of what we do is we experience infrastructure and we'll go off to the side and we'll talk about it. Something else unique about this intersection is over here, you can see this straight pole. This pole is actually a piece of cycling infrastructure. It's a rain sensor, and so it does rain a lot in the Netherlands, and the last thing they want is on rainy days to people decide not to cycle. So what the rain sensor does is it senses the rain in, and then it'll turn the signal, that'll allow for more green time for the bike signal. So the people in the cars who are protected, they can sit a little bit longer while they clear the intersection and get the people from A to B faster so they get less wet. So really clever. And then there's different, these are called shark teeth. It's the yield sign that's painted. We explain the signage and the pavement markings, and the students are exposed to this infrastructure, and then they use it to see how it is. I mean, they're coming there as cyclists, but most of my students who are coming are not cyclists like myself, been cycling for many years. They're just like, they grew up cycling a little bit, and they're interested in the topic and they'd like to study abroad. And so here we go. So they're really novice cyclers, but they very quickly within the first day are feeling comfortable cycling in this community with a lot of ease and comfort with safety. And not all the cycling infrastructure is on the street. It's also separated. This is a very impressive and interesting intersection that's in Zwolle that we visit. It's actually a roundabout. You recognize it, but it's different than most roundabouts we've been in that cars cannot go all the way around it. So the median here prevents the cars from going all the way around it. The cars stay on one side, but about 10 to 15,000 bikes go through this intersection every day, which is a lot of bikes. And they needed a safe way for bikes to get through it because it's also a busy car intersection as well. And so in this case, the shark teeth are pointing towards the cars. The cars yield to the cyclists on from the inside of the roundabout. And so it's really interesting. So we talk about the meaning behind the pavement markings, the meaning behind the colored pavement, the meaning behind these raised medians here, how it's used. We meet the designer, the gal from Zwolle, who's part of the program. She was the designer of it. We talk about the process of it and the intersection. So it's a really fun place to go. We also traveled to Eindhoven. This is also kind of a world-renowned piece of infrastructure. This is the Hovenring that's in Eindhoven. Eindhoven is famous for the Philips electricity company, and so the motto of the city is like City of Lights. So it also has a kind of a light show associated with it. But anyways, it's a raised roundabout for bikes and pedestrians above this really busy intersection. So we visit it. It's pretty fun to be there. Even in the US, we have infrastructure or cycling infrastructure, tunnels under major roadways to keep the grade separated so that cars and people on bikes don't have to interact. Something interesting about the tunnels in the Netherlands is that they often will have a way for light to enter into the tunnel, because tunnels can be dark and not fun places to be if you've been in them before. So that's an issue with safety. And so in order to encourage people to ride more, part of it is we want them to feel safer. And so by introducing light and actual real light, ambient light into the tunnel through its design, and they do that by separating the lanes above it, it allows more light to go in it. It creates a safer setting, therefore more people and of different ages will cycle in it. So we talk about things like that. This is a railroad bridge that connects two cities, Zwolle and Hattem. Hattem is another city that we visit. And they have a piece of cycling infrastructure. They've got a trail connected to this railroad bridge. So we use it. And actually on the way back, we take a bike ferry, which is really fun. And so just more unique ways, more different types of infrastructure that people get associated with when they get on the tour. Our students do a project specifically in sustainable safety, so I'll assign them different pieces of or different intersections in Zwolle, and the students will have to pick apart what principles are being applied at these intersections, and then they have to present them to the rest of the group, and we are at the new public library in Zwolle doing that. There's a lot of people biking and walking. This is the route from the train station to Windesheim, the university where we work. And so there's cars, there's a lot of high schools nearby, so there's a lot of people. And because the Netherlands is so small, a lot of people can live anywhere in the Netherlands, and then they take the train to work, and then they walk or bike from the train station to work. So it's quite a bit different than how we start our day and transport ourselves to work. But when I would come here for work every day, initially, when I was on sabbatical, I actually changed my time. I adjusted my time to work by 5 minutes because there were so many people. It was hard for me to even find a gap in the bike traffic to enter the stream to get to the campus. And not being as experienced of a cyclist as the people who grew up here, I just changed my behavior. But it's important for the students have to think about stuff like that. So there's one of the mornings we'll actually arrive ahead of time, and we'll go to a particular location on near this train station, and we'll just park our bikes and we'll just watch. So they can see the number of students walking from the train station to the university, and how do you deal with, it's basically like the stadium, like a stadium type crowd. How do you deal with that many people at a time? And so as people who design infrastructure, students have to think through things like that. And that typically becomes one of the projects that the students work with the Windesheim students on. When I was developing this course with the mobility faculty at Windesheim, one of the courses that they teach is called traffic psychology. And I was like, what is that? We have no psychology courses specifically embedded in our transportation classes, but it does make a lot of sense. So going back to the purpose of mobility, why do people transport themselves the way they do, and can you change it? One of the things how you can change people's behavior is by making it fun. And so this course, I think, is a whole lot of fun. And this was just an outing that we did when we were in Utrecht, another very large city in the Netherlands. And Mark, who is the cycling ambassador, he brought us to this fun piece of infrastructure, and the students had a great time. But we do an entire lesson in traffic psychology and fun theory as far as how can you change people's behavior. This is also in Utrecht. It's a new bridge called the Rabobrug. I may say that wrong, don't know. I did pass Dutch once, so that's pretty great. But anyways, we use this piece of infrastructure. It's a long bridge that goes over the train station. It connects the city center to the other side of the train station. So we're always just using different types of and new pieces of infrastructure related to cycling. You can see here, most people are biking in the Netherlands, right? So they have to have a way to bring their bike on a bridge. And so there's our gradual stairs, and on the right is a ramp. And then they wheel their bikes while they walk them. So it's just getting students more exposure and creative ways of solving problems is what we're doing. This is a really fun network, Barbara. This is the one I was kind of talking about. There's an app for this. It's called the Fietsroute Network. And basically the whole country, and then it's extended into Belgium and Germany, is a series of off-road paved infrastructure for cycling. It's a cyclist's dream. And so what you'll have is you'll start a route, and then the routes are numbered. And then where the routes have junctions, there's a map that's just in place. And then you look on the map and you look for the number where you'd like to head to get around the country. And then the sign helps get you there. So it's a really fun way to travel throughout the Netherlands. And there's an app that goes with this. So you can just use that while you're cycling. But then there's also a whole network of hotels, kind of like Airbnbs or just bed and breakfasts, that are also part of this network. And so that can be a really fun thing to do. A lot of my students talk about wanting to go back with their families and show them this whole course, because I think an important part of studying abroad is really just being able to have the confidence to travel internationally. And that's something that my students, I know they can do. By the time they're finished with the course or even halfway through it, they can fly to Europe on their own. They can, right at the Amsterdam airport, you could get on the train and travel anywhere. They learn how to use the train system. From the train, they walk to town, they know and where they can and how to rent a bicycle, and then they know how to use this network, and then they see where the bus system is, and it's just easy to use it. So it gives me a lot. That was an important part of the course development, as it is, I'm sure, in any study abroad course. Just getting students the confidence to want to and feel comfortable traveling. We travel to different cities, like I've talked about. Houghton is a newer city that was added because Utrecht, the city, was kind of built out, and they needed more places for people to live. And so this is a city that we have toured, and it was specifically designed for cycling in mind. So it's a cycle-focused design city. And so we visited that. This is just a map of it. As I said, we do spend some time in Amsterdam. And so this is the Rijksmuseum, and you can actually bicycle through the Rijksmuseum through this tunnel. That's it right here. So that's really fun. The hostel that we stay at is very close by it. It's also right near the Vondelpark, which is a long green space park that runs through Amsterdam. This is Meredith talking to our students about the infrastructure in the Netherlands. And then the last 2 times I was able to get tickets for the Anne Frank House. So that was a really important historical piece to bring into the course too. And so that's something I can do as long as I plan ahead and there's tickets available. And so that is a really nice opportunity. There's also some great history. A lot of people just think, yeah, the Netherlands is just biking and that's how it always has been. But actually, back in the 60s and 70s, there were plans to, and they actually started to demolish parts of the city center of Amsterdam and have it more be car focused. They were going to demolish it to put in larger networks of freeways, just like we did in the US. And a lot of younger children got killed once the amount of auto vehicle traffic increased. And so they did actually had a lot of riots that occurred there. And finally, the government is like, forget it. We're not going to go this direction. People love these buildings. We're not going to tear them down. And so they decided to maintain their cities with the historic buildings that they have and focus on cycling and public transport more. So maybe a smarter approach to transport for their location. Another neat part of my course is this night. So we are able to spend an evening with some friends of ours. They have some children, and so we've all become kind of a family. And so they invite us to their home. They show what a Dutch house looks like, and then they have a meal. They make a meal for us, and then we all just enjoy each other together. So that is a really fun opportunity. This is our friend Engelberg. He had a sausage shop at the market in Zwolle, and we met him when we were on sabbatical. And so lekker means good. Rookworst is a type of sausage. So we have lekker rookworst met with Engelberg in the Netherlands. And so it's nice for me to introduce my students to the people that I met. And so that was a fun opportunity, to do so. So this is pretty much the course. It lasts 16 days. We travel throughout the country. The majority of the transport from city to city is done done on a train. When we're in the cities, we go by bike. We also use the metro. So Rotterdam is another city that we visit, which is a large city. And it's really unique to go to Rotterdam because in Rotterdam, it wasn't bombed during World War II, or it was bombed during World War II, and most of the other cities were not. And so Here's Rotterdam down here. And so it's a newer looking, more US focused city, but there's a lot of cycling infrastructure that is also there. So there's a major river. Rotterdam has one of the largest ports in the world, seeing that this is a civil and environmental sustainability course. If you're in the city that has one of the largest ports, you should go to it. And so we do. And so there's also a lot of floodway projects in the Netherlands. About 60% of the country is below sea level, which is hard to comprehend. And so there's a whole series of water networks and waterworks that really control the water in the Netherlands. And so in the very last time we went in, the students actually went on a specific tour about that waterworks projects because they're interested in that because of their profession. So, so it's a 16-day course. We usually leave the Sunday after spring semester is over. I try to do it in the beginning of the summer. I think it's important that our students do internships, and so I try to have it live between the time the semester ends and the beginning of June, so that they can come back and continue to having their internship. The students who would be graduating that spring, they can still participate in the course. They can still walk with their peers, but they don't officially graduate until the end of the summer on a piece of paper. But they are welcome to walk, and Education Abroad helps collaborate that and make sure that works out. I cap my course at 12 students because that's a lot of people to ride with. And I've had 12 twice and 10 one other time. I'm super excited about going again. You can probably tell this is one of my favorite things in the world to do. And I'm very proud of the efforts that I've put into this course, and I love sharing it with students. And like I said, we are producing students who are passionate about this topic, and they're working for companies doing this type of infrastructure work specific to cycling as part of their job. And that really warms my heart because they too now are becoming experts and can bring things back to me. I've been able to continue the relationships with the students at Windesheim, even now that some of them are graduating, and that's really fun. One of my students that I had as a first-year student in Windesheim he graduates, and he now the last time we were there, he led a part of the Rotterdam tour for my students, and actually part of the Amsterdam tour also. And so these are students who also really appreciate this relationship. So it's been my pleasure to share it with you, and I hope that you would want to join me. And if you've got any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
I have a question.
Yep.
So when you're talking about the psychology of transportation, is there a specific way to address behaviors of society in the US toward bicyclists?
Certainly there are. I think one benefit about the Netherlands versus the US is because most people bike in the Netherlands, the cyclists are also end up being the drivers. So it's not like all these people who are cycling in the Netherlands don't drive a car. They do. It's the trips that are like 10 kilometers and less is what they cycle for, or maybe even a little bit longer than that. So it's because they're both cyclists and drivers that they can appreciate each other. There's a lot of answers to that question. Another answer is in the Netherlands, when there's a bike car crash, 50% of the fault automatically goes on the car, which could be a good thing, but it also could be a bad thing because it can lead to hit and runs. So that also brings in the, hey, I better pay attention. There's a lot of bikes around me kind of attitude. And so there's that. Then, like if we look at the employers in the Netherlands, they actually have incentive programs. So let's say you're going to be a new faculty member at UW Platteville or at Windesheim, you would be granted a kind of bike buy-in. So you personally could go buy a bicycle, and then over the course of the next 3 years, the university would pay you, let's say, 500 euros each year to kind of pay you back for that bike. So they're motivating you to use a bike. They do the same thing with public transport. So the employers in the Netherlands, they will either grant you a train pass for during the week to commute to work, or they'll grant you the train pass for the weekend. You get to decide, it depends on where you live. One of my colleagues had lived in Groningen and had like a little bit over an hour train ride to get to Zwolle to work at Windesheim. He actually was paid more once he moved to Zwolle, where Windesheim is located, because it costs the society less if he lives closer to work. So there's many layers like that also go back into psychology, but there's definitely multiple ways that they're encouraging people to change their mode and maintain the mode of cycling.
Cool, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I just think about when you're talking about if there is discussion about development of this kind of infrastructure in the US, it's hard to get the buy-in from government and from,
yeah, it is. I mean, that's one of the things I do in my in my free time is I work for the bike ped group here at the city of Platteville, and I experience it every time I do that. One of the best things that we can do is get our leaders and our decision makers actually out in that infrastructure. That's really important. And so there's a US group called People for Bikes, and they help fund sending leaders like mayors of cities to places like the Netherlands to do a study tour so that they experience the infrastructure and they can feel and see how it all looks, because they recognize it's the decision makers who get to decide if we're doing this or not. And so if you can expose the decision makers to what it actually is like once the network's in place, you can get the buy-in. It also is hugely dependent on who's running the USDOT. And so it's very, like, the secretary of the USDOT is appointed by the president. And so we now have a different person who's going to be running a new person as a secretary of the USDOT. He was instrumental in making Indianapolis a bike and pedestrian friendly place. And he is now the leader of the USDOT for us now. And so that also made a huge impact, because every time you go to the gas station and you put money in your car, you're paying federal and state gas taxes. Those gas taxes are what's used to help pay for the infrastructure. And it's the this is maybe more than you want to know, but it's the federal authorization that's determined by Congress that determines how that money is spent. And so you could imagine the leaders who are running those organizations, the people that we vote for, right? They're the ones who decide how that money is spent. Right. And so that's why it's so important that we get our decision makers using the infrastructure. So get your people out on the trail so that they can experience how great it is. But it's really important to recognize that the infrastructure we're designing is used for transportation and not just recreation. And that's also a mental switch that some people have to take. And it depends on the person, right? Not everyone is going to be comfortable biking to work, but they might be comfortable walking to school or biking to school or having their kid bike to school, or they might decide where to live based on where that infrastructure is. And so there's, like you're identifying, there's a lot of pieces that come together in it. And it's it is kind of a big puzzle to figure out. But I think by looking internationally, we can definitely, and by experiencing what they have and using them as resources, we are getting better, right? There are certainly cities that are more friendly than others. Madison, it takes a lot of effort, right? That's not a fluke that happens. It's because the people there are passionate about wanting to improve their cycling infrastructure that they have what they have. Like, the best thing you could do is continue using it, get your friends to come with you, invite others, find out who the decision makers, and bring them along.
They did that in Boston a lot.
That's awesome.
Yeah, they'd get the mayor out there.
Mm-hmm. It does matter, because then they see the happy smiley faces and they're like, wait a minute, I just also burned 300 calories. This is cool. Right?
I have another question. Sorry, I'm taking up all your time. So when I was living in Rhode Island, I wanted to bike to work. It was about 18 miles each way. So when you get there, you're not the freshest.
Yeah,
so
right.
In the Netherlands, do employers sort of take into consideration and offer those kind of facilities for people to shower off and?
They do. I mean, one of the most impressive things that we see in the Netherlands is the bike parking. So like let's say at Windesheim University, for the faculty and even for the students, there's covered bike parking. It's like on the first level of the parking garages. So it's covered, it's out of the rain, it's secure. And then because it's a university, I mean, they have shower facilities there so they could use them. Most people aren't biking that far. I'm sure some do, so then they would go in and shower, but most people don't. And they're dressing kind of like how you see my students are dressing, like they're kind of tight fitting pants, or I mean, you'll even see women wearing dresses and high heeled shoes and cycling, or men in suits. It's not, they don't seem to worry as much about it as we would, even raining, right? So one of the families we met in Haarlem, so it's like, let's say a half an hour cycle ride between there and the university where their kids were going to school. Even when it's raining, they don't even wear a raincoat. And you're like, well, why? Oh, we don't care. We'll just be wet. It's like, what? So it is different. I live there in the wintertime, so I'm like having my gloves and my hat and my mitten and my jacket, and not everyone even wears gloves. And you're like, well, aren't you freezing? So yeah. I think for some reason they can stay warmer or they don't care. But there's certainly more background supporting infrastructure like showers, and specifically bike parking is there. The longer range electric bikes that go really long distances is something that they are pushing more and more in the Netherlands, in hopes of reducing the number of buses that go between the cities. And so in those cases, you would think you need a little bit more shower facilities. So on campus here, I do bike to work. I only live 8 minutes from here, so I don't get that sweaty. But in my office, I hang some clothes there, and I can go to the pack and I can take a shower if I really need to or something. So right. I think people just kind of figure it out. Some places, I'm sure you could go to Madison, and maybe at the city they have locker facilities. It really depends on the employer. But you're right. And a lot of times I think just people figure it out for themselves, so I end up carrying a whole bunch of stuff on my bike, like in the what if, like, oh, it might rain. So I'm gonna need my rain pants. And it might be cold, and I need to bring my mittens, right? It's like I end up having a whole extra set of stuff on my bike just for the what ifs for my 8-minute commute. But I don't like being cold, so.
Gonna have to have
so a lot of people just have to kind of, like you take it upon yourself, and you're like, well, this is important to me. I'm just gonna figure it out. Could it be that way? I mean, it could be easier, right?
Right. Thanks.
So hopefully all of you can help me recruit students. That would be awesome. So again, it is a civil and environmental engineering course, but it's approved for civil enviro, SRES, sustainability and renewable energy systems, major and minor students. But certainly anyone is able to take the course. I just like to meet with the students beforehand so that I know their motivation behind it. We're not just going partying in Amsterdam. That's how I usually start most of my interviews with my students. My idea of a good time is not partying with students in Amsterdam, right? This is all about learning the answers to the question, why do so many people bike in the Netherlands? Awesome. And how can we, and how can we bring that back home? So
yeah, awesome. Thanks so much for your presentation. Yeah. A really good presentation. I think that's a really cool and unique trip, and I really think it's a great option for specifically engineering students who sometimes study abroad can be harder to complete during their undergrad, whereas this program is counts specifically towards a lot of to some of their requirements. I think that's really awesome.
Yeah,
thanks so much for presenting and being part of our fair.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, you just want to send me the recording when you get a chance. I'll get that posted online and stuff, and I'll trim it up and everything. So
yeah, great.
So thanks so much.
Super. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Have a great day, guys.
Yeah, you too.